the date that all Jews had to leave Spain was also the 9th of Av. And it goes on. There were some terrible crusades that happened on the 9th of Av. There were particularly bad situations that happened on the 9th of Av, but then it also becomes a date where we remember and mourn anti-Semitism, the oppression of the Jewish people, beginning with the destruction of Solomon's temple all the way till today.
Well, welcome to the podcast today. My name is Jeff, and I'm your host, and we are so happy to have a returning guest today. Sandra Barras is the director of CFOIC Heartland's Israel office, and the Christian Friends of Israeli Communities Heartland is the only Christian organization to focus exclusively on the communities of the heartland of biblical Israel. She lives in a small Sumerian town called Karnei Shomron, which we had a pleasure of visiting her there earlier this spring. Sandra, welcome back to the podcast. It's great to have you here.
It's great to be back.
In our last podcast, we talked with you about the significance of Kristallnacht and anti-Semitism. We talked biblically about the quote-unquote occupied territories. And if you didn't hear that podcast, by the way, if you're watching, listening, that would be a great one for you to go back and check out. We encourage you to do that. And if you've never listened before, Sandra, we want to just get you to please just tell us a little bit about yourself and the incredible work that you do at CFOIC.
Oh, well, my pleasure. So I am not a Christian. I'm an Orthodox Jew and have found myself in a very unusual place to be the director of the Israel office of a Christian organization called Christian Friends of Israeli Communities. I actually fell into this many years ago. The organization has been around for almost 25 years. And what we do is we reach out to Christians all over the world and connect them to the Jewish communities in Judea and Samaria. This is where I live. I live in Samaria. I've lived here for many years. And from the beginning, I have been very involved, either initially volunteer and later professionally, in advocating for these communities, often referred to as the settlements. And I like to say that they're probably the single most misunderstood area of Israel. There's tremendous controversy. You referred earlier to the occupied areas. Of course, that's not a word that we subscribe to. For us, this is the heart of biblical Israel, and we have rightfully returned to land that really belongs to the Jewish people. So, this is what we're doing. We're reaching out, we're educating, we're enabling Christians to come in and actually visit these communities, not only on my porch, but on people's porches all over Judea and Samaria. And of course, we also have a lot of projects that we're involved with in the communities themselves, helping the people who live here, strengthening them, strengthening the communities. And it is all being done with the help of support coming from Christians all over the world.
Well, Sandra, the 9th of Av, or Tisha B'Av, I don't know if I'm saying that right. You can correct me. This is fast approaching. I think it's starting this Shabbat, actually, the 6th of August in the evening. Can you please explain what the name means and what is it that this observance commemorates?
Okay, well, it's actually very biblical. Okay, on the 9th of Av, and that would be, in biblical terms, it would be the 9th day of the 5th month. That is the day that the first temple was destroyed by Nebuchadnezzar, the emperor, king of of Babylon. And it marked the beginning of the first exile when the Jews went to Babylon, where they sat in exile for 70 years. Fascinating, really enough. The very same date, almost 500 years or more than 500 years later, the second temple was destroyed by the Romans. So this event, the destruction of the first temple, we know from the Bible, is truly a watershed event. We know about it from the book of 2 Kings. We know about it from the book of Jeremiah. The book of Lamentations, which we believe is also written by Jeremiah, is a book of exactly what it is. Lamentations. It's poetry. It's crying out. It's describing the terrible situation in Jerusalem before and after the destruction of the temple. And it wasn't just that the temple was destroyed. It was the end of Jewish sovereignty. It was terrible, terrible persecution by the Babylonians. And of course, we have that described for us in the Bible. And one of the, what we find, though, is aside from the first and second temple, was throughout Jewish history, there were some really terrible things that happened to the Jewish people that fell on that date as well. So, for example, the Spanish Inquisition. I don't know how many people are aware of how the Inquisition affected the Jews, but at the time, we're talking about 1492. In 1492, Spain had the largest Jewish community in the world, and we're talking about millions of Jews who were living on the Iberian Peninsula and who were, if you can compare something to something today, it's like the Jews in the United States. They were very accepted in the country. They were advisors to the king and queen. They had businesses. They had, community synagogues, so many things. And in 1492, the king and queen of Spain, Ferdinand and Isabella, signed a decree that every single Jew had to either leave Spain or convert to Catholicism. And people who didn't, people who converted and were suspected of being really crypto Jews, were burnt at the stake. And it was a terrible, terrible time. Well, the date that all Jews had to leave Spain was also the 9th of Av. And it goes on. There were some terrible crusades that happened on the 9th of Av. There were particularly bad situations that happened on the 9th of Av, but then it also becomes a date where we remember and mourn anti-Semitism, the oppression of the Jewish people, beginning with the destruction of Solomon's temple all the way till today.
Wow, I did not know about those dates coinciding, especially, the Spanish Inquisition. That's very, very intriguing, and makes sense, to think about sort of observing or mourning those things all together on this day. So today in Israel or Jews around the world, how is this observed in modern times?
Well, it is a fast day. Start with that. It's a day, and when we fast, we don't eat or drink. Okay, so it's a day where we fast. It's a day. It's very similar in what we do or don't do to the Day of Atonement, but it's a completely different kind of fast and a completely different day. Because we don't eat or drink, and we don't go out, celebrate. It's a serious day. But whereas the Day of Atonement is a serious day that is spiritually uplifting, it's a very happy day because we're engrossed in prayer and believe that at the end of the day we will be forgiven by God for all our sins of the previous year. The 9th of Av is a day of mourning, and so the atmosphere is completely different. We begin at night. Right as soon as the fast day begins. And this year, the fast day begins right with the ending of Shabbat, with the ending of Sabbath, Saturday night. And so we go to the synagogue and we sit on the floor. Now, we have comfortable chairs in the synagogue, but the custom is we sit on the floor or we sit on low stools. For those of us who are above 60, it's sometimes a little difficult to sit on the floor, but we have these low stools. And in fact, the synagogue, either you bring them from home, the synagogue has stacks of stools and you sit on them. This is a sign of mourning. And there's indications even in the Bible that when you mourn, you're sitting on the ground or you're sitting, in the dirt, that kind of thing. So it's that same idea that we observe today. The lights in the synagogue are dimmed. You have just enough light to read by, but all those big bright fluorescents that usually are lit are not. It's a much dimmer light. And usually when you have a prayer service, there's somebody who stands up in the middle. He's standing, what we call the bima, and he's, leading the whole congregation. Well, the people leading the service are also sitting on the floor. And what we're doing is reading from the book of Lamentations. And our synagogue, there are 5 chapters. In our synagogue, different people take each chapter and they read it out loud. The melody is it's kind of a dirge. It's a very, it's sad. It's a, mournful tune. And it's all tradition, by the way. The same tune has been chanted, for centuries, and fathers teach their sons, etc. My husband always chants one of the chapters, and they have, 5 people, each one take a chapter and they chant it. And it's a very somber day. And then the next day, of course, there's prayers, and we don't read again the book of Lamentations, but we have other lamentations. We have poems that have been written over the centuries, talking about people who went through a pogrom, people who suffered through one of the Crusades, writing about what happened. So it's not only something that may have happened on the 9th of Av, but for us, when you think about it, the destruction of the temple, particularly now the Second Temple, really was the catalyst for all of this. Why did all these persecutions happen? Why did the Holocaust happen? Because we weren't in our own land. We were not independent in our own land, enjoying God's favor. And so we can trace every single type of persecution against the Jewish people since the destruction of the Second Temple to that day. And so that becomes a time of remembering it. We don't go to work. Some people go to the work in the afternoon, but you're not to not go to work and have a day off and let's go have a picnic, but just to stay home and to, very often it's a day that we're not supposed to study Bible. Why? I mean, there's exceptions. Why? Because Bible is something that gives you enjoyment. However, yes, study the book of Job, study the book of Lamentations, study. We have many, many sources that tell the stories, going all the way back to stories that are told about what happened in the time of the Romans. We have these things preserved in our heritage. Read and study those stories. So very often, for example, in our synagogue, the rabbi gives a talk in the afternoon, and it's not a regular Bible class. It is focusing on some source that we have, and what it means for us.
So very somber, very reflective day, 24-hour period. I think that's good. That helps people to understand, the scope of what it is that's kind of wrapped up in this. Sometimes it's easy to oversimplify and just say, well, it's, mourning the destruction of the first and second temple. Well, it sounds like it's a lot more than that. And I think that it's good for us to understand those things. You've talked a little bit about the history. How far back has this been commemorated? Do you know? I mean, is there reference in the Bible to this being commemorated, or has this something that's come sort of through tradition following the time of those writings?
Well, it actually is mentioned in the Bible, in the book of Zechariah. Very, very interesting situation that happens here in chapter 8. There is this, it starts in chapter 7. Chapter 7, we learn that somebody sends a letter, to the priests in Jerusalem, and they're asking them a question. Now, when is Zechariah? Zechariah, this is taking place when they've already started to return to the land of Israel. The 70 years is over. Right. Jeremiah prophesied that there will be an exile in Babylon for 70 years. The 70 years is over. They already have people started to come back. Let's say this is, it's taking place somewhere in the middle of, let's say, Ezra and Nehemiah. That's more the story that tells about this period. And so at that time, someone sends a letter, and it says as follows: "Shall I weep and practice abstinence in the 5th month, as I have been doing all these years?" This is the 5th month. And by the way, I will also note that while the fast day is on the 9th of Av, from the first day of the month already, we are in a period of semi-mourning. We don't do fun things. Nobody gets married during that period of time. Nobody goes out to a concert, or, you don't buy new clothes even, and I'll tell you what else we don't do. Okay. We don't eat meat or drink wine except on the Sabbath during that time. Okay, we're sticking to dairy products. If Christians might think about Lent, perhaps it's a similar kind of thing. Okay, so they're asking this question. Why are they asking this question? Because they're now back in Jerusalem, and they've begun to build the second temple. So maybe we can cancel the mourning. And actually, so first of all, that's a record of the fact that this is really, and it goes on. He says, this is what Zechariah is talking about, and then he talks about the answer that he gives. But as part of the answer, he says as follows. He says, when you fasted and lamented in the 5th and 7th months, all these 70 years, did you fast for my benefit? This is what God is essentially saying through Zechariah. But he's talking about the 5th and the 7th month. And the 7th month is on the 3rd day of Tisha, 3rd day of the 7th month. There's another fast that is because of the murder of Gedaliah, son of Achikam, that we learn about at the end of the book of Kings and at the end of the book of Jeremiah, which is seen to be like the last straw of this whole terrible thing that happened, during this destruction of the temple by the Babylonians. So that's certainly an indication. But why this chapter, this whole story echoes so strongly for us, because many people in Israel have been asking the very same question. For example, if you read Lamentations, okay, what is it talking about? Jerusalem. Jerusalem has been destroyed. It was once such a beautiful city, and now it's just terrible. And you go on and you read all of these prayers that have been composed for this day that are talking about, we mourn the destruction of the temple, and here we are with Jerusalem destroyed. And you say, but wait, Jerusalem is no longer destroyed. We in our generation are witnessing an amazing, Jerusalem is beautiful. It's built up. It's the largest city in Israel. What do we do with this? And so you can imagine that this was the same kind of thing that the people were asking in the time of Zechariah. And what's interesting is that God doesn't really answer the question. He really doesn't. He says there are 3 different messages. He says, first of all, basically he says, what are you asking me for? I don't eat and I don't fast, which is very interesting, because what God is actually saying here is that this is your way of expressing mourning, so you get to decide if you want to continue or not. The next thing he says is, thus said the Lord of the hosts, execute true justice, deal loyally and compassionately with one another, do not defraud the widow, the orphan, the stranger, and the poor, and do not plot evil against one another. And basically what he's saying is, the issue here is not whether or not you should fast and whether or not we have a temple, but did you learn your lesson? Have you learned how to treat people kindly and correct all those things that Jeremiah and others were talking about, which is the reason the temple was destroyed to begin with? And at the very end, at the end of chapter 8, he goes back to us and he says, the fast of the 4th month, the fast of the 5th month, the fast of the 7th month, and the fast of the 10th month. And these indeed are 4 fasts. We do all of them. So I mentioned the 5th and the 7th. The 4th month is a month ago, where there's a fast day, because it was when the siege of Jerusalem, when they broke through the siege and broke through the walls of Jerusalem. And the 10th month is when the siege began. So these are all dates that commemorate things that were going on. So, during the first temple by the Babylonians. And so we know about these facts, go all the way back to Zechariah. And he says, the fast of the 4th month, the fast of the 5th month, the fast of the 7th month, and the fast of the 10th month shall become occasions for joy and gladness, happy festivals for the house of Judah, but you must love honesty and integrity. And we're still fasting, obviously. And again, a lot of the fast is enabling us to remember, okay, we're in better times now, but look what we went through. But also, we're not there yet. I don't think we can say that everything is glorious and joy and happy. We're still threatened. In Israel, for example, we're threatened by enemies all the time who are fueled by the same anti-Semitism that brought us the various oppressions we had over the centuries.
Mm-hmm. Well, that's a tremendous overview, and you answered some of my questions even as you were speaking, but I did want to reference that text in Zechariah 8:19 and the prophetic words there, that these fasts will eventually become, joyful and glad occasions and happy festivals for the house of Judah. So, not to put you on the spot, but when do you think this might be fulfilled?
Well, we're all waiting for Messiah. Christians are waiting for him for the second time. We believe he hasn't come yet. But there's no question, if we go through the various prophetic words in the Bible that talk about it, Isaiah, just think about Isaiah 2 is just such a beautiful, beautiful, description. And it's certainly a time of joy. It's a time, if you think about it for a second, Isaiah says, let us go up to the mount of the Lord, to the house of the God of Jacob, that he may instruct us in his ways and that we may walk in his paths. For instruction shall come forth from Zion, the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. So the basis for all of this is that there has to be a universal recognition that it is God who reigns in this world. So we're quite far from that right now. Thus he will judge among the nations and arbitrate for the many peoples, and they shall beat their swords into plowshares, their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation. They shall never again know war. So we have this idyllic situation. No question, when that happens, we will be totally joyful. We won't have to worry about, is Iran trying to destroy us and nuke us to kingdom come? And so that's a whole different situation. And we don't know when that will happen, but we believe that we're certainly closer to that time than ever before. Because if I just think of my own family, I'm imagining what my mother-in-law would have felt in Germany in 1936 or 1937, what her ninth of Av would have been like. She was, and she wasn't even the worst of it. The worst was yet to come. But can you imagine, here she feels like she was doing great in Germany, and all of a sudden all the oppression of Hitler, and that's being felt terribly by the Jews in Germany in those years, how that must have affected her ninth of Av. And she said, here we go again. So
Right.
Even
Right.
though I'm sitting in Israel and I can say Iran is trying to destroy it, I can't go look around and say, here we go again, because look where we are. We are in our own country. Jerusalem has been rebuilt. I have gorgeous trees out of my patio. Jeremiah says, again, you will till the vineyards of Samaria. My goodness, here it is. So
Yeah,
we're getting there.
we're getting there. Yes, you do have gorgeous trees out on your patio. They were loaded with fruit the day that we were there. And also there's just many, love traveling around Israel. There's many beautiful wineries and vineyards. It's amazing to see how the country has developed, even in the almost 20 years that I've been going. It's hard to believe really what's taking place. So, Sandra, I'll take a little bit of a dark turn here and go easy on us, all right? But we've had many discussions on this podcast about, Christianity's role in the persecution of Jews throughout history and how the Bible really calls us to bless the Jewish people. And I want to say Christianity in terms of the bucket that is called Christianity, because I believe that many Christians, quote unquote Christians in the past, didn't act like Christians are supposed to act, and that's where I would sort of come from this. But organized Christianity has been a problem for the Jewish people. So talk to me just a little bit, kind of from your perspective. We're talking about sort of mourning all of these things, the destruction of the temples, the anti-Semitism that's gone on in the past. What was your understanding of Christian history when you were growing up? What are you taught about Christians as Jewish children, for example?
Well, I have to say, growing up in the United States of America, I would say among my friends, if I just look at the people that were in my class in school, I went to a Jewish school, I would say the class was divided in half on this issue. And it really depended where your parents were from. So I grew up, my parents also grew up in the United States, okay? And none of them had suffered any outright persecution, although my mother, as a baby, did have to flee Europe just ahead of Hitler. But she got out before they were actually persecuted. My grandfather was very smart, and he said, not good, and he got out. So coming from that, of course, also in the United States is a free country, thank God, and all the different religions have always been respected. So for us, we learned about Christianity as another religion, a religion that believes in, one God, has different principles, theological principles than Jews. But a religion that we respect. At the same time, We did learn, of course, a lot about things like the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition, where the church took terrible, terrible steps. And not just that it was the organized church.
Yeah.
This is what people did because this is what they were taught. Okay. And those, if you talk about Europe, Christian Europe at the time, the people who were responsible for education, the people who controlled political leaders in many times, this was the church. So the church was spreading this stuff. And of course, we were aware of it, but we didn't connect it necessarily to the Christians that we saw, in our neighborhoods. On the other hand, friends of mine whose parents grew up in Eastern Europe had a completely different experience. And not just the Holocaust, before the Holocaust. In the Holocaust, most of the people, who were persecuting them were not doing this in the name of the church. But before the Holocaust, the pogroms that were taking place in Eastern Europe for since the middle of the 19th century on a regular basis, well into the 20th century, where Jews on Christmas, for example, Jews hid in their homes because this was a time when the priest would say, okay, if you really love Jesus, go out and kill a Jew. Now, this is what was happening. Now, I'm not saying all Christians were like that, but you have this trauma that Jews brought with them from those places. And of course, communicated that to their children. So with those people that grew up in the shadow of those experiences, there was far more suspicion of just a Christian they would meet in the street, in the United States. So that was always there, both sides of that.
Thank you. I think that really does help. And honestly, that's one of the first times, that I've encountered your response, that you were taught to sort of respect Christians as people who, believed a little different way than you and so on. We don't hear that one all that often. And it's a refreshing perspective. I do want to say, kind of on behalf of my tribe, that I'm sorry. We Christians, sort of quote unquote Christians, have been horrible to the Jewish people in the past, and we're doing our part in our little corner of Christianity to teach the opposite approach, and that is that we need to support and that we need to bless Israel. And I know that you have met with and come across and work with many Christians who are in that same camp. And I just want to tell people who are watching or listening, today that this is something that we need to kind of take notice of. And I think that, I don't go always very deep into this whole idea of, generational curses and the sins of the past and all those kind of things. I believe we're responsible for our own actions, but because we're responsible for our own actions, I think it's very important that we recognize these horrible things that have happened in the past, and that we do what we can do in our day to right those things. And so I guess one of the things I want to ask you is, what are some of the ways that Christians can show support for the Jewish people, even around a holiday like this, like Tisha B'Av?
Well, I do think that it's a wonderful opportunity for Christians to learn their very terrible, tragic past. I don't think that a Christian today who is, loves the Jewish people, they don't have to love the Jewish people, just respect and honor and treat Jewish people kindly and fairly. People who feel that way today, I don't think that they are responsible for what their grandparents or ancestors or whatever may have done. I do think they're responsible for making sure that the Christian environment that they are in is not tainted by that in any way in terms of how the message is presented to the congregation, to the next generation. I've encountered some people who are not at all anti-Semites. They're good people, they're nice people, and yet sometimes they'll say something about Jews that they don't even realize reflects a prejudice, a prejudice that has been embedded in them and their families for generations, and they don't even realize the ramifications of what they're saying. So just to help Christians understand what is the history, where it went wrong, I think it's important for Christians to understand how this was all theologically based. I mean, when priests went out and said, go kill a Jew. They said the Jews killed Jesus. Therefore, we're doing the holy work of the Lord when we're murdering a Jew. Now, you're hearing this today, Jeff, and it horrifies you because this is not your
Absolutely.
Christianity. This is not the kind of thing you're. But I think it's important for Christians today to understand that once their Bible, their doctrines, their whatever were manipulated and produced this kind of terrible teaching and terrible persecution of the Jews.
Yeah. No, it is. It's horrific, and it does not reflect. It does not reflect New Testament writings or Christianity. It's not something that's there, and it really is a horrible thing. Well, we want to be able to teach people about this and help them understand why it's important for us to come alongside the Jewish people, to bless, support, respect is a good word that you used. I love the Jewish people. I'm one of those, but when we go, we absolutely enjoy being in the country. We enjoy interacting with people and learning more about the culture. I think all of those things are ways that we can be supportive. We're pulling together a tour right now. Finally, we're going to bring a group back to Israel next March, and we want to encourage people to have that experience. And I really do believe. I mean, there's lots of ways that we can learn and understand better, but to me, one of the best ways is to actually physically go and experience the land and experience the people. And I think that when that happens for somebody, the lights begin to come on. There is a petition, an online petition that people can go and sign. You're familiar with this, I'm sure. If people want to go, it's 9-AV.com, 9-AV.com, and you can go and sign a petition and learn about ways that you can support the Jewish people on the 9th of Av. I would encourage you to do that. And Sandra, just maybe one last question. How can Christians learn more about supporting the specific work that you do? And can you recommend any other places where they can go and learn about Tisha BA'Av that we've been discussing today?
Well, I do want to encourage people to get onto our website at cfoic.com. And there, first of all, there's a lot of educational material, and we do have more articles and films and that kind of thing that we've done about the 9th of Av. And I would just, urge anybody to get on the website, send me an email, and I can send you links to those particular resources if you're not finding them yourself. We are doing, and I believe what Christian Friends of Israeli Community stands for, is a complete reversal of that history. So if in the past Christians were involved in persecuting Jews and murdering Jews and preventing the reestablishment of a Jewish home in Israel, that has changed. And today, Christians really have the opportunity to support the people in the very heart of biblical Israel. And that's really what we're doing. And we have, whether you're talking about senior citizen centers, some of whom there's still some Holocaust survivors amongst us today. So that's even a more special kind of support, not just supporting seniors, but supporting the people that were hurt in the most horrible way from this anti-Semitism. But, supporting children, supporting people with needs, whatever it may be, this is an opportunity that we have created, Jews and Christians together, Christians reaching out to us in Israel and saying, this was a horrible past, but today we can change the future. And the future is not just respect, but the future can also include partnership. And if both Jews and Christians read the Hebrew scriptures, which represents about 80% of the Christian Bible, then both Christians and Jews can stand behind this idea of a return and a restoration of Israel. And in fact, if we were talking about Zechariah, there is this wonderful verse in chapter 8. There shall yet be old men and women in the squares of Jerusalem, each with staff in hand because of their great age, and the squares of the city shall be crowded with boys and girls playing in the squares. And if you come not just to Jerusalem, but you come to Judea and Samaria, you can see that. And the fact that we're able to see that again here, where I am in Samaria, there were no Jews living here since the Assyrians destroyed the northern kingdom. That was already like 120 years before the destruction of the temple. And here we have recreated Jewish life here with children and elderly in the centers of the towns. And you, Christians, our Christian friends, can really be a partner in fulfilling these and so many other prophecies.
Beautiful. Well, we encourage you as listeners and viewers to really check that out and consider taking advantage of some of these opportunities. Come on our tour. We have a 1 day optional tour at the end of our tour that will go and visit Judea and Samaria, specifically Shiloh and surrounding area there. And so we want to encourage you to come with us. And who knows, we might even convince Sandra to come and meet you that day. I think probably that's a real possibility. But it'll be great to have you along with us. And so Sandra, maybe March next year, we might be able to connect you with a group of people that we're bringing.
It's a date.
Thanks for watching. You can listen to this entire podcast on your favorite audio podcast platform. Find the link below. And while you're at it, don't forget to click subscribe and follow us on Facebook so you can stay connected to First Century Foundations.